Level up your success with the ICABA World Network, where accomplished Black professionals and entrepreneurs have created a thriving global ecosystem built from valuable connections and impactful collaborations. Be a part of a trusted network that uplifts, inspires, and enhances your success. Join like-minded and leading Black professionals to foster meaningful relationships, unlock opportunities, and access the resources you need to thrive in your career, business, and life. Go to ICABAWorldNetwork.com and join today.
So we've got, today we're doing legal safeguards. And right now I want to introduce you to our speaker. And we are extremely excited to have a very accomplished attorney who is well respected. Not only is she a top attorney, but she's also a professor at the University of Miami Law School. But let me just kind of go ahead and give you her bio. And attorney Marcia Narayan Weldon is a multi-passionate, multi-hyphenate lawyer, professor, executive coach, consultant, speaker, course creator, 2 times bestseller author, podcaster, and retreat host. This reminds me when I had my television station, my marketing person had so many different jobs that we nicknamed her Slash. So I think I'm gonna do the same thing with Marcia. So not only multi-hyphenate, I'll just start calling her Slash. As the founder and CEO of Illuminating Wisdom, she uses, let someone in and change the screen. Sorry. As the founder and CEO of Illuminating Wisdom, she uses evidence-based strategies to help
I'm
people.
actually going to ask you not to even do the bio, because I want to get them straight to some of the legal stuff. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that, some of my experience in the context of how I do it, just so we can save time. And I know you have an appointment that you've got to get to. And I want to be able to give them as much value, because a lot of this stuff, they're not going to remember.
Okay. So. Marcia, you know, what I was saying to you about going, so go until you're finished. We're fine, okay? Because like I said, okay. So Sherry has got you covered, and it is all yours.
All righty. So thanks for having me. And I'm going to make this, I have to be really clear. On the bottom of every slide, you're going to say, this is not legal advice. I can't answer any of your legal questions. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. So I am happy to answer general questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll say I don't know, and I'll find out, or I'll get you to somebody who can. Oh, my slide, okay. So just briefly, because Hutch was going to give that long introduction, I've been practicing for 32 years. I've been an in-house lawyer at a Fortune 500 company, a chief compliance officer, chief privacy officer. Right now, I'm the general counsel of a startup. I've also do things like coach. I coach lawyers. I do lots of different things. And I also teach. And every day I'm surrounded by entrepreneurs, business people, and other lawyers. And of course, I'm also an entrepreneur myself. So when I thought about what to put together, I thought I would try to put something together that is kind of the key things that I see entrepreneurs, the kind of mistakes I see. And I want you to think about this as a checklist of things to ask your lawyer. So here's what we're going to cover in a few minutes. And again, each of these could be an hour. I'll talk about some key employment law things that I see, because I've been doing employment law for almost 30 years. And that's the kind of thing, one case could sink your business. Understanding your key contract terms. You guys all have contracts, or you should, but you probably sign them without knowing what they mean. And so what are some things you should be looking out for in your contracts, either the contracts that you're putting up or the contracts you're getting from vendors, suppliers? With the advent of generative AI, which I know we had a great session on that a few weeks ago, a lot of people are saying, I can just go online and I'll just ask ChatGPT to put together a contract. I've done that. Sometimes they come out pretty good. Sometimes they don't. Or you'll get something off of LegalZoom, or you'll get something from a friend. So I want to give you some tips about things that you should look out for that may cost you, they may not realize. Talk a little bit about terms and conditions and privacy policies. I'm assuming almost everybody here has a website. We think people don't read them. We think they don't matter, but those can be legally binding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then some legal implications about using AI. I am an AI evangelist. I speak on it all the time. I use it regularly. But there's some things that you may not be aware of. And again, we're trying to, how do we protect your business? We will not talk about tax, franchise law, intellectual property, or insurance, and a host of other things, because I don't have that much time and I stay in my lane. Those are not my areas of expertise. I will tell you, though, that if you need lawyers that do that stuff, I know lawyers that do that, reach out to me and I'm happy to help you. The slides are going to have a whole lot of information, juicy information. I'm not sharing the slides because,
Hey, Marcia,
yes.
can I jump in for just a second, just
Sure.
as kind of a reminder to folks? So our objective is not, okay, to think that we're going to give you everything that you need to know today about legal safeguards, okay? But our objective is to make you aware of the things that you need to know about legal safeguards and to introduce you to someone or some people who can help you with that. So, so just kind of, if you will, I don't know, what do you call it when you say you give somebody your, I don't know how the term is escaping me right now, Marcia, but we're just kind of letting you know that that's our focus is really just to make sure you get what you need to know and where to go get it. All right, back to you, Marcia.
Thanks.
Disclaimer, that was what I was trying to say. That was my
Disclaimer. And here's the disclaimer also. I want you to think about is, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. Let me go call my lawyer, or let me find a lawyer. And as I've mentioned, and I've told Hutch about this for the past 3 years, I am developing some online courses that will be very affordable for new and small businesses on some of the legal pitfalls, which will have checklists, which will have templates, which will have all of those things. When they do roll out, ICABA members will get a very significant discount. And I actually will be looking for some beta testers who can get it for free. So if that's something you're interested in, you can reach out to me as well. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things that I see get companies in trouble. Basic things about employment law. This could be a 6-hour presentation just on this slide, but I want to focus on the kinds of things you should be aware of. Some of you guys have employees. Some of you guys deal only with independent contractors. Some of you all deal with interns, but there's a few things that these kinds of issues, as an employment lawyer, I've seen a single plaintiff case cost a business $250,000 just to win, right? Before they finally settle. And if you lose, it could be significant. And a lot of these are things that people do pretty much every day. So I want to give you some pitfalls and things to think about, right? First of all, you got to know what laws you actually have to comply with. These are the federal laws. If you've got one or more employee, FLSA, which is wage and hour, there was a time when in South Florida, and I'm not sure where everybody is, but in South Florida, when 25% of the cases in the federal courts in Miami were wage and hour cases. That's how big of a deal this can be. We've also got immigration, ERISA, tax, all of these different acronyms, which we're not going to go through in any kind of detail, but you need to make sure that you realize, you might say, all right, I just have one employee, who cares? You still have to comply with a number of federal laws. Once you get to 15 or more employees, you're dealing with the Americans with Disabilities Act. You're dealing with Title VII, which is race, gender, etc. 20 or more employees, you're dealing with the Age Discrimination Employment Act. 50 or more, and then 100 or more. So one of the things I tell people when they're having business and they're going to expand, I say, you got to be really careful, because once you get to a certain threshold, you're going to have to worry about these laws. A lot of times I see people put together an employee handbook for their business and they cut and paste and they put in all these laws they don't have to comply with. That's a terrible idea, because then you're putting your employees, you're giving them the idea that you're going to comply with things that you don't have to. These are the federal laws. I don't know if anybody here does business in California. That's a whole other thing. So this is an example, and you guys, if you have a business, you'll know you have to have these posters up because you have to let your employees know what their rights are. All of these are examples of some of the federal laws. These are the full names of them, right? Then you might have state laws, assault and battery. You might think, I'm not beating up the employees. You touch the employee or make them feel like they wanted that you're going to touch them, they can claim assault and battery. So many different things: infliction of emotional distress, false imprisonment. I'm slamming the door shut to have a meeting with my employee and they feel like they can't leave. These are the kinds of claims that people will bring. Loss of consortium, they can't have, sexual relations with their partner anymore. They're saying it's because, I'm just going to use Hutch here because he's sitting here, because Hutch was a terrible boss, caused me emotional distress. Now I can't have my familial relations. All of these are the kinds of things that people can bring. So I tell people, to get some basic training on employment law so you have an understanding, because it doesn't matter. And I have defended cases where the person hired their next door neighbor. It was the godmother of their child. They weren't doing well at work. They got fired. Then they brought the lawsuit. So you never know. Don't assume that this person will not sue you. I have seen family members sue each other in labor and employment issues when things go wrong. So we should never assume this will never happen to me. But I want to start off with starting the employment relationship. You should be thinking about having some kind of an offer letter, and you should have a job description. A lot of times when you go online and LinkedIn or Indeed, you'll see job descriptions. One thing you want to talk to your lawyer about is it ADA compliant, Americans with Disabilities Act compliant, if you are subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, that's if you are at a certain threshold of employees. This is really important. I once had to deal, almost every valet in South Florida knows my name because I was hired by a client to train 2,000 valets because a valet company did not hire somebody who was deaf or hard of hearing. They thought, how is he going to hear the horns? How is he going to hear the cars? The government said, that's discrimination. So that company spent a lot of money on me. I was very happy about it, but their job descriptions, and they were not thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. When you're bringing somebody in, especially if you're bringing somebody in sales, do they have a restrictive covenant from another employer? What does that mean? Do they have a non-compete or a non-solicitation? You want to ask about that, and you want to make it very clear in the offer letter that you're hiring them contingent on them not having any restrictive covenants. Do you want to put out a restrictive covenant? Do you want to say a condition of coming to work for us is that you can't compete with us or you can't solicit our employees? And you want to make it very clear that it's not an employment contract. Very few people in the United States have an employment contract. Some CEOs, often in some startups, but you want to be really clear. But your offer letter, you have to say it's not an employment contract. Same thing if you have an employee handbook. And you're not, by the way, required to have an employee handbook, but I always recommend that people do. One of the biggest things that gets small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs in trouble is they hire independent contractors. Why? Because we don't want to pay all the taxes, right? Like, look, I'd rather just have a 1099. I don't want you to be a W-2. Almost all small businesses will make these mistakes, but here's the problem. The government doesn't like this because the government's not getting its taxes, right? So you have to sit there and determine, is this person actually an independent contractor? And this comes under the wage and hour issues. So think about this, that if this person can work for more than one company, this person can set their own schedule. You give them a 1099, they're probably an independent contractor. But if the government thinks that they are actually an employee, the government's going to go back for all those back taxes, all those back wages, all of the overtime, if they were entitled to overtime, and will also go back for workers' comp. So you've got to think about it. If I'm telling you, Hutch, you need to be here from 9 to 5, this is the rules, you got to wear this uniform, you've got to do X, Y, Z. The government may think that this person is actually going to be an employee, which means you may have to go back pretty far. If this person is entitled to overtime, but because you're an independent contractor, you never thought about overtime, the government will ask that person, by the way, we think you were an employee and we think you were entitled to overtime. How much overtime do you think you worked when you were working for Hutch? And what do you think that employee is going to say? Oh, well, I mean, every week, the man worked me 100 hours a week. And you won't have any records because you didn't keep records. And it's going to be your word against the employee's word. So be very careful about independent contractors. There is an IRS form called SS-8, which can actually help you determine whether or not that person is an employee, an independent contractor. And this is one of the areas, one of the top areas where the Department of Labor and the states work together on this, plus the IRS. They have a memorandum of understanding. So if one government entity thinks it's an independent contractor, all the other government entities will come as well. When does this usually happen? The independent contractor has been working for you all this time. You say, hey, your contract's done, or you don't even have a contract with them. They go to a lawyer and the lawyer says, you were never an independent contractor. You were probably an employee, which means overtime, benefits, vacation time, whatever you were giving to your employees, you give to them. Any questions before I keep going? Because I know I'm talking fast. Okay. The other big area that small and medium-sized businesses get in trouble with is wage and hour law. This is the Fair Labor Standards Act. The independent contractor issue comes under that as well. But are you paying proper overtime? Are you doing equal pay? Are you doing the record keeping? This is one of the areas where I tell businesses that they should do a wage and hour audit. I had a client that ran a lot of the COVID centers, COVID testing centers, and they assumed that all of their people were wage and hour, were independent contractors. Department of Labor did not think so. And remember when during COVID, when you can drive up to a place and it's a 24-hour service, they had people on call. They weren't keeping records of people as it relates to being potential W-2s. And in fact, the contract, the state didn't think of them as, they thought they were independent contractors. Federal government thought differently. So this was a situation where we had to work with the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor, to say, we think these people actually should be characterized as exempt from overtime, because if they were actually had to pay overtime for all of these people, this would have literally put could have put the company out of business, right? So when you're talking to your lawyer or when you're thinking about it, and by the way, the Department of Labor has great resources for employers on looking at this. So you don't have to hire a lawyer right away, but there's only certain exemptions for somebody to be an exempt employee. And by exempt, I mean exempt from overtime. Very specific tests. You can go on the Department of Labor website, but you may have somebody that says, I want to be on a salary. And I've seen this happen. I'm going to get a mortgage. It's better if I'm on a salary than getting paid by the hour. And an employer will change it. If the Department of Labor and the federal government, the state government doesn't think so, it doesn't matter what you call the person. They've got to meet several tests. And the Biden administration is really cracking down on this area and is looking to make it harder for people to be exempt from overtime.
All of them was different here too. Just like.
Is there a question or somebody need to be on mute? Okay. So what might be non-exempt? Construction, your production line, licensed practical nurses, but be careful with RNs because sometimes they're exempt and sometimes they're not. First responders, etc. But there's lots of different pitfalls. This is an area that I say, look at the Department of Labor website, but keep in mind that you still really want to have legal counsel work through this with you because the penalties can be very, very severe. So where do companies fall down? If you've got to have people put on uniforms, the time taking on the uniform and taking it off, safety gear, pre-shift activities, pre-shift meetings, walking time, if there's a big warehouse, waiting time, on-call time, training time, onboarding, seminars, all of those are things. You have your assistant who gets paid by the hour, but she works through her lunch hour. That's time she's supposed to get paid. Your assistant gets paid by the hour, but she clocks in on the weekend to answer your text messages. That's time she's supposed to get paid. And often we don't think about that. And it almost never comes up until, again, the person gets fired or a whistleblower calls the Department of Labor. And the Department of Labor, you have to give them all of your records for the people for the past 2 or 3 years who have worked for you. And they have to have unfettered access to talk to them and ask them questions. So it can be a very, very expensive thing for an employer. So other things, if you're tipping employees, so many different kinds of things that come into play. So a wage and hour audit, again, I say, look at the Department of Labor website, but this is one where you want to get a professional to make sure of, because you can have to pay back pay for 2 years, 3 years if it was willful. If you're like, I know the law, but I don't care. 3 years back pay, liquidated damages, that could be double damages. Plaintiff's counsel can get attorney's fees. There could be collective actions, which is like a class action. So again, these are the most expensive things that can hurt an entrepreneur, a small and medium-sized business. And remember, if you just have one employee, you have to comply with these various rules. Any questions before I go on to the next thing? That was the scariest part. Everything else should be a little bit easier, right? Now, if you have employees or even customers, do you want to have a non-compete, a non-solicitation, non-disparagement clause? You want to protect your proprietary information. You don't want somebody working for Hutch Enterprises, they learn all the information, then they go and compete or they go work for a competitor. Not knowing where everybody is, Florida is very pro-employer friendly on non-competes. California, pretty much it's almost impossible to do a non-compete that will pass muster. The federal government is looking, and the FTC and the Biden administration is looking to ban non-competes. because they think it is anti-competitive and does not let workers go work where they want. So this is something I'm going to tell you all, if you have non-competes in place or you're thinking about it, you want to make sure that you are checking with your local law and keeping track of this, because there's a lot of legal challenges. And if you do have it, it's got to be reasonable in geography. So if you only work, and for those of you in Florida, if you only work in Miami-Dade County, you can't tell somebody they're going to have a non-compete for the entire state of Florida, because that's not reasonable for geography. It can't last forever. You know, even if it's a CEO, maybe 2 or 3 years. But there was a case with Jimmy John's sandwiches, and some of you guys may know Jimmy John's, they make the subs. They had non-competes for their sandwich workers. And the court said, that's a little ridiculous. All right, I know it's proprietary, I know the sandwiches are good, but basically anybody can see you and see what you're doing, so you can't have a non-compete. So a lot of people would put non-competes there, even if they know they're not enforceable. And I advise that that's not really a great idea. What might you think about instead? You always want to have confidentiality clauses because you care about your confidential proprietary information, but think about having non-solicitation clauses, because what you really care is, I don't want you to solicit, you leave, I don't want you to solicit my customers, I don't want you to solicit my key employees, but you want to be very careful. If somebody was just, if somebody didn't even work on that client's matter, is it really fair to say you can't solicit any employees? So you got to think about who's bound. Is it your current employees? Is it your former? Is it your vendors and suppliers? Courts don't always like that because they say, you can't say nobody else can use a vendor. Is it, what kind of industry are you in? So you want to be very careful on these non-solicitation clauses if you have them, because they tend to be more enforceable than non-competes, but they can still have some risks. So here are some red flags. What's a court going to say? Okay, you can say, so let's say you have your employee, let's say Sherry leaves Hutch, I'm going off, starting my own thing. It's okay to say you're going to have a non-solicitation. Courts are less likely to say you can't hire them. What does that mean? That means if some employees see Sherry put something out on LinkedIn or Indeed or on a website and people apply, that's very different than her going after the employees. So that's what courts may look at. What about the supplier vendor? Some courts will say, why are you letting them, why are you saying you can't use their vendor? You can't use a supplier, but those things come up. They can't solicit the customers, all the customers or just certain ones. So general solicitation on LinkedIn, you want to have that built into your non-solicitation clauses because it makes it much more likely to be enforceable. You might think, all right, we fired this person. Let's say Sherry didn't leave on her own accord. She was fired. And then she threatens to sue Hutch. So you might say, I'm going to do a severance agreement, right? And so some of you might have received severance agreements. You got to be really careful. If you have a business and you give severance, the only reason you're going to do that is you get a release so that they won't sue you. There's a lot of very specific rules. There are specific rules that you can't tell people they can't testify in front of a government agency, right? You can't say you're going to waive your right to overtime that you earned. You can't say that you're going to waive your right to workers' comp. And these rules change quite a bit. So one of the things you want to be careful of is checking your state and federal law on that language with the release. But I tell people, if you fire somebody, even if it's just 2 weeks, try to get something to at least have that release. But here's the thing. If you have a severance plan governed by the government agency called ERISA, that's one thing. And most people here will not have that. Mostly big companies have that. But you can have what's called a de facto severance plan. So if every time somebody gets fired, you give them severance, and I give Devin 3 months and I give Denise 6 months, Sherry's going to say, wait, how come I'm not getting that 6 months? Because if everybody that's been at this company for 5 years or more gets 6 months severance, I'm entitled to that too. So even if you don't have a written severance plan, you might have what's called a de facto severance plan, which means you are still governed by those same rules. So I always ask people when they get fired from their boss, ask for the severance plan. And then the company says, we don't have one. Said, ask if they ever give severance. And when they do, and do they have a de facto severance plan? And that typically scares people. So this is something you want to be very careful about, right? So what would I do after listening to this? I would conduct a wage and hour audit. You don't want to do this by yourself. There's checklists and you want to think about it, but you want to get somebody who's experienced in this area. You want to have counsel that's had experience dealing with the Department of Labor, right? Think about the penalties because it could run back 3 years of back pay. And you can have liability for withholding wages. And of course, the attorney's fees and so many other things. Ask some tough questions about your independent contractors. Again, look at that IRS form SS-8, that's SAM-8, because it will actually kind of give you a good checklist. And the independent contractor rules are in flux right now under the Biden administration. Make sure if you're doing a severance or anything like that, you look at the federal and state limitations on the releases and confidentiality. And check your offer letters to make sure that you're not hiring somebody that has a restrictive covenant in place, or that you might not want to give a restrictive covenant. And by restrictive covenant, I mean a non-compete, a non-solicitation, non-disparagement. And then make sure you check your offer letters in the process for background checks, drug screens, etc. State and federal laws. A lot of the states have very strict rules on what you can ask in terms of background checks, largely because they directly impact our community, right? In terms of either criminal records or in terms of not working in certain places for certain periods of time. And with drug screens, it's almost impossible to find anybody with a negative drug screen right now, between the people that are, have a prescription for opioids or have a prescription for medical marijuana. So if you have to have drug screens because you're in a safety sensitive area, then do that. But a lot of employers don't even do that anymore because very few people in certain industries and in certain parts of the country are going to pass it. Any questions before I go to some key terms for some of your contracts that you should know?
I have a question.
Sure. And
Right.
again, I'm not giving you any
So-
legal advice, but happy to try. Okay.
Understood.
Mhm.
So I have several independent contractors. My business is a charter business, charter
Mhm.
boat business. So a person like a captain would be an independent contractor. I also have servers that are independent contractors. They do have to wear a
That's
uniform.
typically the case, right? Because here's the
Mhm.
thing. If you had this one captain and he could, because I'm assuming with your party boat service, you don't have them working all the time, because if nobody's chartering the boat, there's no point in paying them, right? If you are now, I'm going on a cruise on Thursday on Virgin. Those people are employees because they're sailing all the time. They can only work for Virgin Voyages, right? And they are actual employees. So an independent contractor, how the government sometimes looks at it is if this person is integral to your business and they can't work someplace else, right? So and again, not giving you any legal advice, just based on what you're saying, I think you'd be, because I'm assuming that captain can go work for other party boats if you
He
don't have
does.
out there,
Yes.
right? Then that's going to be a
Yeah.
different thing, right? So let's use another example of a bakery. If you have a bakery, your bakers are not independent contractor, because by definition, your bakery's open every day, etc. Now, you want to have your bakers can't make Italian wedding cake, and you're going to get a special contractor to come in during Italian wedding season and make the Italian wedding cake. Or I'm from the Caribbean, time for them to make some black cake around Christmas time. That's a different thing, right? You might have independent contractors under that circumstances. But I would go through and just check out that SS-8 form, because everything is fine until somebody gets laid off or you don't have any business for them. And then they go to their lawyer or they go to their friend, or their friend says, you should find a lawyer, and they send a demand letter, even if they don't think they have a good case, because they know how expensive it is for you to hire a lawyer. And they say, give me $10,000 or give me what, called the nuisance value, and I'll go away. But
Right.
business like yours, a lot of people that have caterers, they have servers that come for a special event. Those people are typically independent contractors, or you may contract with a company that hires them.
Yeah, but I guess the problem that I'm running into right now is, including today, I had a call from my payroll company, because I do need to pay these people. And they're saying, oh, by the way, like you said, Biden administration is cracking down on this. As long as they have to wear a uniform, do they have to report 2 hours before? Are these people actually independent contractors? So I'm just kind of concerned about the whole situation, because I have over 150 of them, and sometimes they may not be
It's a
available.
big issue, and
Mhm.
we can talk offline, or I can recommend you to talk to some to counsel on this, because it's a big issue, especially in South Florida, where things flex up and flex down, right? You don't always need people all the time, and you're going to have a situation where people will work. If you're a caterer, you're not going to have certain staff all the time. You're going to call them when you need somebody. And we have a
Right.
hospitality industry. So that, again, this is also why South Florida is such a hotbed for these kinds of cases. And what you'll
Got
often
you.
find, the Department of Labor came after my client because they were going after nurses, nursing homes and stuff like that. They were looking at how were the LPNs versus the RNs versus the people that give the injection. They were looking at that because they'd seen it happening in other states. So sometimes it's not even you. If one construction industry place gets hit, all the constructions get, the restaurant,
yeah.
etc. So that's how it happens. And
Got you.
hospitality is a big hotbed for this area.
Wow. All right,
Any other
thank you.
questions? Sure.
Yeah,
I know I wasn't
yeah,
very
no,
helpful,
so far
but
so good.
I know that
Yeah,
wasn't very
thanks.
helpful for you, but it's a legitimate concern.
Appreciate you.
Contract terms, right? You guys all have contracts. You either give contracts or you get contracts. One of the things I tell people to look at a lot, and this comes in the miscellaneous or the boilerplate section, is the indemnification. This is really important because what you're saying is, I am going to make you whole if a third party sues based on our contract, or this is the only way I'm going to make you whole. So think about this like insurance. What it's doing is it's transferring the risk, right? So number one, if you have insurance and you might have to indemnify another party, you want to find out from your insurance carrier what that deadline is and what they will actually cover, because sometimes they won't cover things. I've had clients say that their insurance companies will say, oh, you were supposed to tell us that you had an indemnifiable claim within 30 days. You didn't tell us, so we're not going to cover you. And some of those are very, very big claims, right? So think about what might be excluded, what might be there. You don't want to sit there, if you have a software company, you don't want to sit there and indemnify people if there's a data breach, because that could be outrageously expensive. So based on your industry and based on what you do, think about what's there. Who's being covered? Is it your parties? Is it third parties? Is it one way? Is it mutual? What I tell people is think about the biggest risk that could come to your business, where a third party could bring a claim, or your opposing party can make a claim, or your customer can make a claim. What is that you want to contract for and indemnify, and what do you not? It doesn't always have to be mutual, and it doesn't have to always be indemnifying for the same thing. And it doesn't have to be the same thing for all your contracts. You want to look at the language that's in there, right? So if you see the hold harmless, it means you're not going to be held liable. Defend, who's going to pick the counsel? So a lot of indemnification clauses don't cover this. And you want to know if you are going to ask the other company to indemnify you because a third party brings a claim. You want to know who's picking the counsel, who's directing the strategy, who pays for the counsel, and who decides whether to settle. So a really good indemnification clause is going to cover that. A lot of them don't. So if you have the chance to negotiate a contract, take a look at that indemnification clause to make sure that you're properly being protected. What does it cover? I see things that say, we will cover any and all losses. I'm like, why would you do that? Do you know what that means? Are you limiting your liability? Is it bodily injury? Is it death? If that's the case, it better be because you were grossly negligent or willfully and reckless, not just negligent, and not as any and all. So again, a lot of people will cut and paste things from contracts, but they don't realize that this is the kind of thing that could be really expensive. I would never indemnify for the loss of corruption or data, right? So think about what is it covering and what is it not covering. Now, if you're the one that wants the other company to indemnify you, you of course want all of this, right? But what's often not covered? Intellectual property issues, failure to mitigate. And you also want to think about what's the level of conduct or misconduct that's going to bring this in. So is it negligence or is it gross negligence? Is it misconduct or is it willful misconduct? Those qualifiers can make a huge difference when it comes to what gets covered. So again, think about what your insurance coverage costs, because that could be a big issue for you. You might also see something like a cap. If you have a software as a service agreement, otherwise known as a SaaS, or some other kinds of things, you might see it say, look, my entire liability is just the amount that you paid for the 12 months before. That might be $100, right? So you want to think about what's the value of the product or service as you look at the indemnification. You always want to make sure if you have to indemnify that there's something in the contract that says you're not dealing with punitive damages, special damages, your lost revenues, your lost profits, etc., because that could be astronomical. So you want to think about, again, these are things to look at, have your lawyer look at your contract and say, what does my indemnification actually cover? What do I have to cover if something comes wrong, right? There's a concept of force majeure, really came into vogue when COVID came in, right? Force majeure basically says it's impossible, it's impractical, we can't do this contract, something that's not within our control, right? A lot of times people used to have in their things epidemics, but they never had pandemics because we never had a pandemic, right? And what does this mean? This means that it might say you're not responsible for payment. You're still responsible for payment, but not for performance. Or you're not responsible for payment or performance, or we can get out of it. But you want to make sure and look at, is there a force majeure clause in your contracts, right? It's something that's beyond your control. If you've got epidemic there, you want to also have pandemic. You'll also think about things like act of God, but every court will say this may or may not be an act of God, right? So I've seen things talk about labor strikes and labor stoppages. I've seen courts say that is within your control because if you're a better employer, you wouldn't have a labor strike. So it's not a catch-all, but you want to have it. And again, you want to think about talking to your counsel about, do I need this and what will it cover for me? Next thing I want to cover briefly, unless there's any questions on that, is a buy-sell agreement. You may not have this, but if you have business partners, whether you're an LLC, a limited liability company, you're a non-public, you're a privately held company, but you've got partners, you want to have something in there that's either a separate buy-sell agreement or you want to have these kinds of clauses in there. So think about this like the prenup, right? Because you have to think about what happens if somebody dies. Who gets the shares? Does your agreement, whether it's your shareholder agreement, your partnership agreement, your operating agreement, what happens to those shares or those membership units? What happens if somebody becomes disabled? What if there's a divorce? What happens to that person's portion of the business? I know a lot of unhappily married people that cannot get divorced because they have a business together and they don't want to split up the business, right? What if there's a deadlock or disagreement? For many small businesses, they've had to guarantee personal loans. What if there's a default of the personal guarantee? If you want to sell, how would you determine it? So if you have any kind of partners in your business and you haven't thought about these things, you really want to make sure that you either have a separate buy-sell agreement or that you have these provisions in there. Let me just make sure there's no other questions. Okay. Next thing, and I'm going really quickly because again, this is just a preview of things I should ask my lawyer about, right? I'm assuming most people here have some kind of website. And you're like, who cares about the terms of use of privacy? Nobody ever looks at that stuff. But especially with online businesses, everybody's got them. These are going to be legally binding. So you need to make sure you're not cutting and pasting somebody else's that doesn't make sense. You might hear them called terms and conditions, terms of service, user agreement, that kind of thing. It is a contract. So you want to make sure you're not using a lot of legalese. Make it clear that if you use my site, you've agreed to these terms. And it's a contract that binds people to it. So even though you think nobody reads them, it is a legally binding contract on your website. You want to update it regularly. You want to talk to your counsel and say, hey, I started this business 5 years ago. Is there anything I should change in my terms and conditions? Because when people go to your site, they are agreeing to use it. They're agreeing to be bound by the contract. Right? So what do you want to have in these? What's the effective date? So whenever you update it, you want to change the effective date. What are the user guidelines? Are people able to post things on your website? Do you have chatbots on your website? Can they link to your website? Are they able to download pages from your website? How can you terminate their ability to get on your website? You want to have a warranty disclaimer. Nothing on this website, don't rely on anything, right? This is as is. You want to have lots of and big capital letters for any disclaimers. You want to limit your liability. And you want to have something that says they agree. And think about the governing law. So, the terms and conditions, every time you upload, I got my phone here. If I upload some kind of update for my iPhone, there's that long thing. And you said, I agree. That's what that click wrap is. I agree. You don't really read it, but it's a whole long contract. And if I wanted to sue Apple, they'd say, oh, did you not read the terms and conditions when you did that update on your iPhone? That's the same kind of a thing. It is a contract, right? So make it clear about your intellectual property. Everything on this site is our intellectual property. You can't reproduce it. You can't reproduce text without our permission. If they're able to upload pictures, you have to make sure that they are legally able to upload things to your website because they might be infringing on somebody else's intellectual property, in which case you could be liable. So you want to disclaim the liability for that as well, right? Think about having an as-is clause. Everything on this website is as is. And again, think about your industry standards and whatever the local regulations are. And again, each of these slides could be 40 minutes. But again, this is just a checklist of things to talk to your lawyer about, right? So again, think about limiting your damages, right? I would make an indemnification one way. If you screw up, you indemnify us, right? If you link something from a third-party site, you have to indemnify us if that third party comes after us, right? And I am not at all in any way responsible for what's on my website, okay? Think about your privacy policies on your website. You should also have this. There is no federal privacy law in the United States that governs the entire country. There are industry specific, there are insurance privacy laws, there's HIPAA, there's CAPA, there's TCP, there's so many different ones based on your industry, but there's not one that governs everybody in the United States. And every single state has its own laws. So you have to think about the sector and the state. So if you have a privacy policy on your website, you want to work with counsel, or you can find some reputable ones online, but make sure it makes sense. If you've got anybody from the European Union that has access to your website, your blog, anything, you've also got to comply with the European Union privacy laws known as GDPR. If you've got California residents, depending on what the revenue is for your business and what you're doing and what industry, and you have to have certain things about California on your website. Every state has its own little thing. So you want to be really careful to make sure that your privacy policies are there. But even before you do a privacy policy, you want to have counsel, or you do a privacy audit. What information are you collecting? Are you collecting personal health information? Are you collecting personally identifiable information? Emails, dates of birth, social security, those kinds of things. Who has access to it and why? The data breach laws can be very significant. And you want to make sure that that you're protecting the data and that you've got the appropriate cybersecurity and other ways to protect it. Because if third parties, employees, others have access, you could be liable for this. So make sure that what's in your policy actually corresponds to what you can do. So what should you have in your privacy policy on site? What's the effective date? What the definitions are? What personal information are you collecting and why? California is really specific about this, as are some other states. You have to say what you're going to do with that data, right? Are you transferring it to other countries? This is something employers don't know. Even if you're an employer and you're trying to transfer your data to another division of your company overseas, there's still laws that govern that, even within companies. How can they delete their information? What if it's wrong? And who to contact? So those are all things you want to think about in your policy. You want to think about, is your data being encrypted end to end, right? Are you using firewalls? If you have any medical data, financial data, employee data, you might have their driver's license number, you might have their social security number. You have to be very, very careful about that. And also check with your vendors to see what they're doing, your payroll company, all of those. How are they protecting that data? Because again, you could have some liability issues. Anybody have any questions before I want to go into the legal risks with using AI, which I use, by the way, 3 or 4 hours a day. So this is not to say don't use it, okay? First of all, a lot of people are using AI tools because they want to screen employees, right? There's some dangers in that. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission fined a company $250,000 because of the screening tools that they were using were discounting people because of their age. So there's lots of algorithmic biases and other kinds of things that you have to be careful of. So even if you are using a recruiter to hire people for you, ask them if they're using generative AI and ask them if they have followed up with the most recent EEOC guidelines and the government guidelines about using it. Also, when you're putting things in, you might actually be violating somebody else's intellectual property. OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, is being sued by the New York Times right now and by lots of other people for infringing on their intellectual property. Because how does ChatGPT get its information? It scrapes the internet, everything. Also scrapes every random conspiracy theory, Reddit forum, all that kind of stuff, which is why it might come out with information that's not correct, why it's called the hallucinations, right? So here's what you have to think about. Let's say you're using ChatGPT in your company, or your employees are using it, or your contractors. If you don't have the enterprise edition and you're not paying for it, The enterprise edition, very different thing. I'm not talking about if you pay $20 a month for ChatGPT. So if you have the enterprise edition, this is what they tell you. Control your data. We don't train on your data. We have this amazing level of security for you. And if there's a problem, don't worry about it. We're going to indemnify you. We're going to hold you harmless. We'll take care of everything. We'll procure at our expense the attorneys to make sure that there's no problem. That's if you have the enterprise edition. If you're a regular person and you're paying the $20 a month for ChatGPT 4, or you're doing 3.5, if there is a problem, you are agreeing to indemnify OpenAI, a company with a tens of billions of dollar valuation market cap right now. You have agreed. So most people that are using ChatGPT are not using an enterprise version. You have to indemnify them. You have to pay their attorney's fees. By the way, it doesn't say reasonable attorney's fees. They're attorney's fees. I cut and pasted this directly from the site. And what else do you have to worry about? If you want to sue us, good luck. Feel free. But just so you know, the maximum we're going to pay for anything is $100. This is that limitation of liability clause I talked about that you should have in your contracts. This is what they say, right? And forget the enterprise. If you're not the enterprise, we might use your data to train our models, right? So if you don't want it, you got to opt out and go through this whole process. But by definition, if you are using ChatGPT or any of the models that are out there, I think Claude 3 from Anthropic is a little bit different. They are using the data that you put in to train their models. So what I advise people to do, turn on the privacy settings in all of your AI tools and don't allow your data to be used for training. Turn off the chat history in your settings on all your devices. Most of you guys are not going to do that because you like the chat history because it makes it easier for you. Check your vendor contracts. If they are using information and they're putting your private confidential information to do work, because everybody's using AI right now, what are they using to protect the data? And make sure if you've got an IT provider or a web authority to make sure your data, your client's data, your employees' data is not being used and scraped for training. And I think every single business needs to have an AI policy right now. Talk about what those authorized purposes and tools are. Require some human oversight, especially if you're going to be giving legal advice, business advice, financial advice, medical advice. Make sure there's some human oversight. Tell the employees what they can and cannot put in there. I've seen people put, they're like, my lawyer is too confusing and too expensive, so I'm just going to put all the contracts through ChatGPT and let that explain it. That means all your confidential client information, your client contract information is out there for the public to be used. So you want to make sure you prohibit them from using AI, from conducting legal activities, infringing on other people's rights. And again, if any of your work product requires professional judgment, you want to make sure that they're not using it without some other human oversight or verified process. And another thing, if you go on Canva to create your logo using AI, you use generative AI for anything that you think is protected by intellectual property, it is not. Until the Copyright Office changes that, the United States Copyright Office has said there is no copyright protection if you use AI to create your logo, to create your work product, to create anything that you do. Also know that you can increase your risk of cyber attacks. We hear about cyber attacks and phishing attempts. There are prompt injection attacks where there are hackers going in when you are using artificial intelligence. And then you also want to be careful to understand the dangers of what are called deep fakes. Deep fakes, you might have heard about it with Taylor Swift at the deep fake. You might have seen, this is when right now it just takes 3 seconds of your voice and one video or a few photographs, and someone can clone what you sound and look like. I just spoke about this in Los Angeles on a panel with the General Counsel of Cyber Command for the United States government, a colonel, and we were talking about democracy, the elections, and we're also talking about corporations. You're using biometrics as a safety feature, that can be cloned. There was an employee in Hong Kong in February who literally paid $25 million through false accounts because he thought his CFO and other colleagues told him to do so. They were on a Zoom call. It was a real-time deep fake. He thought it was them. $25 million. Because it sounded like the person, it was responding back, and they had the technology. You may have heard about that robocall that was a robocall of Biden telling people not to vote in the New Hampshire primaries. That was a deep fake, right? So what companies have to be worried about is you could have a disgruntled employer, anybody, if you have an online presence and somebody can hear your voice, somebody can see your pictures, they can do a deep fake. So you want to, if you have staff or independent contractors, etc., you want to let them know, if I ever ask you to do something crazy, like wire a whole bunch of money to an account that you just don't think it makes any sense, you need to say, you need to pick up a phone and call me. By the way, phone numbers can be spoofed now as well, but you need to double check, especially if you're in a larger company and people are like, I don't want to question the boss. Because this employee first got an email and was suspicious. And then they got on the Zoom call and he was assured, because this was the CFO of the company and 4 other colleagues, all of whom he knew, none of whom were real. That's how scary this has become. And so you have to make sure that your staff and others, and that you're aware of these, and even for your family members, right? Because there have been situations where people have said, I've got your daughter, give me the money for ransom. Or I guarantee you, if you call your grandmother and say, Grandma, I'm in jail, I need $1,000, your grandma's going to do whatever it takes if your voice sounds like you. So I tell people, tell their family members a safe word or phrase, not something that would make sense, right? So not South Beach lady, because people will know that, right? It's got to be a nonsense sentence or word that nobody can guess by looking at your social media. So if they get a crazy request like that, or, hey, open the door, I left my keys outside. I left my keys at, someplace else. You tell your kids, what's the magic phrase? And it's got to be a magic phrase that is not going to be something that's going to be easy to guess. So on that happy note, I talk really fast. I actually talk about 220 words a minute. So if anybody's a court reporter, you know how fast that is. If you want to learn more, if you want to stay in touch, I hope this works. And if it doesn't work, we'll send something out. But this will give you my LinkedIn. This will give you my website. This will give you everything, Instagram, everything you could possibly need. And again, the goal of this was not to teach you everything, but to have you say, I got to talk to my lawyer about this, or I got to do more looking at this. Federal Trade Commission has excellent resources for small businesses. Department of Labor, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they all have really good resources. So if you need help there, feel free to reach out there. And how is a regular person supposed to know this? It's almost impossible. It is, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. The artificial intelligence landscape changes by the day, by the minute. When I was talking at this cybersecurity summit last week, I was in front of cybersecurity lawyers. A lot of them didn't know some of this. The things I showed you about OpenAI and the indemnification, I talked to lawyers at big law firms. They didn't know this. So the regular person is almost not going to be able to know it. That's why I kind of make it my mission to kind of educate people, because there's a lot of nonprofits. They'll use ChatGPT, et cetera. They'll put in stuff. I'm going to do my bylaws. I'm going to do this. I don't have time I can't afford a lawyer. So I'm going to do all these things. And they don't realize that there could be infringing on intellectual property. Their confidential information is not going to be confidential because they're not the enterprise version. So these are things that you should talk to your vendors about. How are you using artificial intelligence with my account? Let me know. Or how are you protecting my data? Is it encrypted, right? So questions to ask, and happy to share checklists with you guys, but you really want to think about, you don't want to, this is the low-hanging fruit, right? I would rather people, so the reason I'm developing courses for small and medium-sized businesses is I'd rather you guys spend your money and put it back into your business. But at least if you kind of have a fighting chance, that's saying, you know what, let me make sure this policy is right. Let me make sure I'm paying these people the right way. It's going to be much easier for you. Ricardo.
Yes, thanks for the great information. Where can people inform themselves? Because this is a monster changing every day, and
On
it's
the
great
AI
that you're
issues?
telling us, but I mean, there's a lot of people using this, not even knowing, so it'll be great to have some direction on its legality.
I need to put together a resource guide, because I spend about 3 hours a day looking at artificial intelligence stuff. I'll listen to developer conferences. I could be the CEO of OpenAI because I know every speech Sam Altman's ever made. I also teach a class in ethics and technology. So I make it my point to know this, but I also talk to small businesses about this as well. AI is fantastic, right? It can save tremendous amounts of time and effort, but most people are never going to read the terms and conditions and aren't going to realize some of these things. And so the Federal Trade Commission now has gotten a lot of, they have a whole section on artificial intelligence now, because, and the Federal Trade Commission is meant to protect consumers, right? That's one place I would look. I would look at government websites that are there, but I'd start with the FTC. But I am thinking of putting together a resource guide, because people ask me this all the time. I get deep into the weeds on some of this stuff, but for the average person who doesn't have the time to think about this, think about it for, you know, look at maybe if you're part of a trade group. Now, the biggest problem I say is that a lot of people are out there talking about the tips and tricks, which are great, which I always follow, but they don't think about what might this mean if there's a breach? What might it mean if there is? It's much, much easier now for you to get hacked because of AI. And AI, of course, has been around for 50 years. Siri is AI, Grammarly is AI, you know, Amazon Alexa, that's all AI. We're talking now about generative AI, where they can actually make something new out of what you say. And the problem is it's changing so much that even people can't keep up. Even people in the industry cannot keep up with it. So it's going to be almost impossible, you know, for a person. I'm looking at it from the future of work. Knowledge workers, it's going to be hard because, you know, you can spit out a contract if you have, you know, a reputable AI source. I wouldn't use ChatGPT. You can spit out a contract in 10 minutes, right? You can do a lot of stuff very easily, very quickly, as long as it's a source that you can trust. And I think that's the problem. We don't know who you can trust. So you can go on Instagram, like, try this, do that, etc. But what you're not aware of is, are you infringing on somebody else's intellectual property? If I make my fantastic logo and I try to go get it trademarked, you know, you're not going to be able to. Or you think it's trademarked and it's not, right? So that's why I tell people, yes, use Canva, do all that kind of stuff. But keep in mind, if you think that that's going to be protected under the intellectual property laws, you are incorrect. So those are some of the things. But from a cyber perspective, by the way, remember, like, you used to know when an email was like, that's not real because they didn't spell my name wrong. The email address doesn't make any sense, right? They're not using like some kind of broken English. But now, because of artificial intelligence, it's much easier to do a phishing attack, right? Or spear phishing, when they're going specifically after you, Ricardo, giving the name of your CEO and saying something that makes sense. So that $25 million thing in Hong Kong was a combination spear phishing attack. I'm going directly to the person and using names that he or she would know, and a deep fake. And so that's what's becoming more dangerous. You know, let's say you have a disgruntled ship captain, Denise, but you didn't, you know, you don't want to use them anymore because you don't like how they run things. That person could do a deep fake of you and go online and say, by the way, all of our ships are out of commission for the next 2 weeks. If you're not paying attention, that's why I tell everybody to have a Google alert about themselves. Somebody could go out and do a video right now. If you don't know, you can't do anything. And there's this other thing, and I'm gonna, you know, I know we're over time. I'm happy to answer questions. There's this other thing called what's called the liar's dividend. The liar's dividend is the theory that we've been hearing for the past 8 years about fake news, you can't trust the media, etc. So now, if somebody says that's just a deep fake, like, well, is it or isn't it? I don't know if I'm going to believe you, right? This is why news organizations are concerned about this. And this is why companies are concerned about this, because you could have a disgruntled employee go out, leave, and pretend to be the CEO. And by the time the communications and public relations people find out, that person has pretended to be the CEO and said something about the company that is not true, or gone out and said something racist or homophobic or against, you know, Palestine or against Israel, and it doesn't take long. You can spend $20 to do a deep fake with the technology. It's very, very easy. That's a big threat that companies need to be aware of.
Marcia, can you put that QR code again?
Sure.
Yes,
I don't know
please.
how it works, because it doesn't always work. So let me see.
Yeah, it was working, but
Like, I don't think I need to talk to her. Now I must have said something scary. Right. So again, if I can't help you guys, I'm happy to help refer you to other people as well. And I'm going to be starting to put some of these tips, you know, in shorter versions on TikTok and Instagram. TikTok, by the way, is terrible for privacy. And I know that, but it's, you know, we really don't know where our data is going on that. But I'm going to be putting more tips for small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs, because I do worry that people don't have this information. I don't think most people know about the independent contractor issues until it's way too late. And, you know, it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you might not even, and you might win. And if you lose, you can be talking about millions of dollars.
I don't think the code gets you anywhere.
It doesn't working? Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, I thought it was working. All right, I'm gonna type in, I'm gonna type in my website information, and you can join the mailing list, but you can also email me. So I'll put that in there. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn, Marcia Narayan Weldon. I'm on there all the time.
You put a link in there?
I did not put it in there. Let me see if I'm gonna have to try to find it. I should have that link for the LinkedIn handy. Let me see, stopping sharing. That should be working though. Let me go to LinkedIn really quick. Sorry about that. Are there any other questions while I'm finding my LinkedIn? On Instagram, I'm Illuminating Wisdom, by the way. So you can find me on Instagram there. But let me find
I
my.
actually had a question, Marcia,
Sure.
about what's the significant difference between a part-time worker and a contract worker, an independent contractor?
Okay, so part-time is different than, so it's interesting because part-time comes up a lot. Some companies will say it's less than 30 hours a week. Some companies say it's less than 35 hours a week. Part-time, people start thinking about part-time. Worker. Oops, I think there's an echo. A part-time worker typically is somebody who is employed by the company. And they're not, so you're giving them a W-2. So you could be a part-time worker and you work at Amazon at night and you work at CVS during the day and you get W-2s from both of them, right? You're still an employee, but you're part-time. An independent contractor is somebody who is not an employee of the company. That person has their own business. So even if you have an independent contractor agreement, you want to have an agreement, you want to know that they've got insurance, right? You want to make sure that your independent contractor agreement makes it very clear that they're not an employee, an agent, etc. You want to make sure it's very clear that you let them know that they are able to work for other people, but that they are bound to keep your information confidential. Okay, so there's lots of things that you want to have in the independent contractor agreement, but that is that contract that you have, and you are required to go ahead and send them, that 1099. So you want to get the W-9 from them, and you send them that 1099, so that, but you're not supposed to take out taxes, etc. And the big issue is most small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups will hire everybody as an independent contractor because they don't want to pay all those taxes. I don't know if you're going to work out, so let's start you off as an independent contractor. That's what a lot of people do, right? And the government says, well, but you didn't pay us all of our money. And by the way, another thing, so Denise, this is important for you. All of your workers are independent contractors. None of them are employees. If you have an employee, their only remedy if they get injured on the job is workers' comp. If any of your wait staff, ship captain falls and slips and breaks their back on the boat, they can sue you. They don't get workers' comp, right? It's just like anybody else being on there and slipping on an ice cube on the dance floor. Same kind of thing. So that's another concern that people have to be careful of. So if you have a lot of independent contractors and you're in an industry where injuries could happen, you want to check your insurance coverage and see what's there. But independent contractors cannot get workers' comp, and employees can only get workers' comp.
Our insurance is very hefty. Trust
Good.
me.
Good. Well, I would imagine. So you got partiers in South Florida. Of course, it better be hefty.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions I can answer?
Yeah.
No questions?
No other questions.
A lot of information.
I'll share it again because some people said they could see the QR code, and so I'm just going to share it again just in case anybody needs it. And then I think, Sherry, you're supposed to close this out.
Yes, thank you very much for all of those golden nuggets. There were quite a few. Were you able to put your information in the chat so that everybody can?
I did put the LinkedIn, I think.
Okay.
I thought I did. Yes, my LinkedIn is there.
Okay. You know what? I wanted to know when will you have the courses available to help?
I've been talking to Hutch about this for 2 years. My hope is that I'm going to try to get them done in the next, and then probably, hopefully by the end of May, because I'm going to be out of the country the entire month of June. But I see so often people getting bad advice on Instagram or on TikTok, or, getting their legal advice from ChatGPT. And these are not going to be expensive courses. They're going to be like $300 for, I think the most expensive one might be $1,000. And it might be like you get the whole suite and you get everything. And by the way, it's employment law, data privacy, cybersecurity, nonprofit law, contracts in much more detail than that. There's a few others things about if you're dealing with, intellectual property, which I'm not going to do, but I have a colleague who's been doing this for many, many years. So she's going to do the intellectual property one. She's a Black female. So if you're dealing with influencers, if you're, all of social media, all of these different things. So basically kind of then the toolkit that I'd, again, rather you spend a few $100s with me than spend, a few $100,000 or even a few $1,000s on something that you could prevent. So it will have checklists, it will have templates. So what you saw here was, and it'll start from the beginning, by the way, if you're just starting a business, should you do an LLC or should you, do an LLC taxed as an S? Or should you just do an S corporation? What might those limitations be? What kind of investors are you looking for? What's an accredited investor? How do you finance? All of those kinds of things. So it's going to be a much bigger suite of things that
Marcia,
hour.
Marcia, the legality training in AI, I think it would be powerful because I think there's a lot of, I think a lot of people have no idea and everybody's just jumping in.
Yeah.
So
like I
anything in
said,
that
I
area,
talked to
it'll be
practicing
powerful.
lawyers. They have no idea, right? And so there was so Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said 80% of the Fortune 500 uses OpenAI because they're doing it by email addresses. So people a lot of times use their work email address. That doesn't mean that 80% of the Fortune 500 is using it. And all those people are using the regular, either the free version of 3.5, or they're paying the $20, but they're using their work email. And you don't get any protection. So first thing I would ask your employees, who's using AI in the company? What version are you using? What are you using it for? Right? And think about putting that AI policy in place. And then again, talk to your vendors because your vendors are using AI also. Are they keeping your information protected? Because that's the thing that most people are not thinking about.
Yeah, that
One
AI
more
part
time, the
was
QR code.
a bit scary.
One more time.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dwight.
Thank you very
One
much.
last one. I promise I got it now.
Okay. And if not,
Oh,
connect
yeah.
with me on LinkedIn because I'm on LinkedIn every day in the messages, Instagram occasionally. And I am going to be starting to post more about kind of business issues because there's such a huge need for it. And I feel like I'm obligated. And a lot of times I'll do things for free for entrepreneurs just on employment law. We go for an hour, like all the wage and hour stuff in detail. But I don't want people to have to just talk to me. I want you to have your checklist. I want you to be able to say, or before you go to a lawyer and spend money, say, this is my understanding of what I've got to do now based on my business. So instead of spending a whole lot of money, you spend a lot less money with your lawyer. That's really kind of what I want people to do because I am also an entrepreneur and I'd rather you guys put the money back into your business than paying people like me. I mean, I'm not going to take your money, but I'm just saying, but I think that's what entrepreneurs need. So.
Yeah, we'd all appreciate it, I'm sure.
Sure. So you want to close this up, Jerry?
Yes, you all should have received a survey, a brief survey that popped up on your screens. If you could please fill those out. This was a great eye-opening presentation here. So I'm sure that we all appreciate that.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you all for coming. And remember, on Thursday, we're going to continue this process with Jackie Jimenez, how to get news coverage. That sounds exciting. Also, how to win government contracts. Another way to make money in your business, if not from contracting, maybe you're interested in franchising. These are all great topics. And then we're going to keep it going Tuesday, driving sales and optimizing revenue. So with that, I'm going to bid you all adieu. Please, I hope to see you guys again on Thursday, right? What is today? I'm lost.
Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. Okay, on Thursday. I'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job,
Take care.
Sherry.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marcia. Very
Bye.
valuable. Take care. Bye-bye.
Level up your success with the ICABA World Network, where accomplished Black professionals and entrepreneurs have created a thriving global ecosystem built from valuable connections and impactful collaborations. Be a part of a trusted network that uplifts, inspires, and enhances your success. Join like-minded and leading Black professionals to foster meaningful relationships, unlock opportunities, and access the resources you need to thrive in your career, business, and life. Go to ICABAworldnetwork.com and join today.